As a member of the Souls community, I've probably seen this conversation like 100 times. Man, Dark Souls, what a great game. It's just crazy to think it all started here.
Objection!
Actually, Demon Souls is where it really started.
And then every time, there's a third guy, and he metaphorically pushes up his glasses like an anime villain and says,
Actually, the real first Souls game is Fromsoft's Kingsfield back in the 90s.
Is it though? Is it really? I guess we gotta play it. But you know, 25 years ago, that's a pretty long time. I only know one way to go back that far. Yeah. Now first, I have to point out this logo animation at the start. Miyazaki, if you're watching, this is kind of rad as hell, so please bring this back. Thank you. But anyway, Kingsfield, or technically Kingsfield 2. Pause real quick if you're curious why that's the case. So you immediately just gain control of your character on this beach. And yeah, from there you're free to explore. And yeah, you're free to go around and explore. Okay, Kingsfield, I see you. I see you. You know what, Kingsfield? You have my attention. I should probably mention the graphics before we get any further. They look pretty rough, right? But guess what? They actually look considerably worse, but I'm just playing on an emulator with some settings adjusted. With how it actually looks on the PS1, this game is crunchy as hell. It certainly looks its age and then some. So for the sake of you as the audience, I thought it'd be nicer to decrunchify it with a higher resolution, more stable frame rate, and no texture dithering. I totally understand if this is a grave sin to the Kingsfield purists out there, but I really think it's for the best and keeps the style and tone of the game intact. But yeah, even with this upgrade, the visuals are still pretty aged. But you know what? They actually grew on me, especially the models for the enemies and NPCs. There's just this sort of old school charm to them that I can't help but be into. Maybe it's just my RuneScape nostalgia showing, but I think it kind of works. Actually, it doesn't always work. So when I finally stopped dying to giant squid attacks, I spent the next 15 or so minutes just running around and grabbing items and gear. And while I was running around, I very quickly had to adapt to the control scheme because golly gee, this game has one. So this is a first-person game, and the control scheme for these types of games has been standard for like 20 years at this point. You move with this stick, you look around with this stick. But in 1995, this wasn't the case yet. Here's the PS1 controller. I hope you can see the problem. So let's go over how Kingsfield decided to handle this because it's sorta interesting and probably the hardest part to get used to while playing in 2020. Go forward, go back, turn left, turn right. Okay so far. Strafe left, strafe right, look up, look down. This definitely was uncomfortable, but I did eventually get used to it. On the topic of this being a first-person game, I want to mention one more thing. For those of you that know your video game history, you'll know that the original Doom actually came out just a year and a half before Kingsfield. This is notable because essentially every first-person game that came out around then was compared to Doom. And if you look at some reviews that were written at the time about Kingsfield, you'll see that they mention Doom. Now this is funny to me because Kingsfield being compared to Doom sort of mirrors how everything is compared to Dark Souls these days. And there's something kind of poetic about that. The combat is unavoidably a big part of a game like this. So what's it like? Now I don't want to mince words here. The combat is pretty rough and absurdly clunky. This is how the majority of combat experiences play out. You attack, back up, wait for your meter to fill up again, attack, back up, and yeah. Later on it does get a bit more varied with multiple enemies and having to maneuver yourself around, but this is the core. Also you do get magic, which is actually pretty cool. Early on it's just your standard fireball or whatever, but by the end of the game you get some really neat stuff like an ice dragon that homes in and traps enemies in a crystal. Genuinely cool stuff. If nothing else, the combat does do a good job of making you feel powerful by the end of the game when you're one-shotting all the old enemies. Now all that being said, I can actually accept the combat for what it is, but the pause menu UI? I don't know, man. You need to pause the game constantly. This is because you need to heal constantly. So here's what the process looks like. You pause, select items, slowly scroll down your big list of items, then use the item. This is made worse by the fact that most enemy encounters seem designed so that you sort of need to just tank damage to get through them. Anyway, it's just incredibly cumbersome and it got in the way of my fun quite a bit. So after a couple hours of playing, something dawned on me. Yes, the combat can be pretty awful, but that's not the emphasis, is it? Exploration is where the emphasis is placed. And then I realized, this game is a first-person metroidvania. Now before you start writing an essay about how I'm wrong, hear me out. Yes, when we think of metroidvanias, it's usually a 2D game with platforming, but look at what Kingsfield has. It's got an interconnected world, as well as obstacles and locked doors that you can only pass after getting the necessary items and abilities. Once I made that connection of, yeah, this is actually a metroidvania, things started to click. The navigating, the backtracking, the secret finding, that's what this game is about. Oh, this door is locked. Oh, I got a key now for it. Nice, a bow. Now I can fight that giant bug. Sick, I have a flute. Now I can use it to summon bridges of light to go over gaps. Metroidvania. While this is pretty cool, it unfortunately doesn't pair super well with the extremely samey looking areas and wall textures, with often no environmental details to help you tell which area is which. It's pretty easy to get lost. Like on one hand, yes, figuring out where to go is a key part of the experience of Metroidvanias, but when you can't even tell where you are because half of the rooms look identical, the experience of navigation becomes a lot more tedious. By the way, if you want to have your mind blown real quick, most of the Soulsborne games are actually Metroidvanias too. Yes, you have to stretch the definition a bit, but the world structure pretty much matches. Think about it. The interconnected world, the backtracking, the locked doors, the progression via key items, it's all there. And I think a lot of that inspiration, to some extent, came from Kingsfield, and that's pretty neat. Speaking of exploration, I do have to mention one big aspect of it that I did find pretty irritating in this game. Fake walls. Now, if you played any of the Souls games, you should be pretty familiar with fake or illusory walls, right? The way they typically work is you find a suspicious looking wall, you attack it, and there's a secret behind it. The real key with why I think this works is that there aren't too many of them, and there's also often some sort of environmental hint to help suggest to you that, hey, there might be a secret here. Kingsfield has neither of these. There are so many fake walls, and they are often placed seemingly at random. Now, the effect that this has on gameplay is that you end up needing to mash X on every single wall of every single room and hallway in the game. And I'm not exaggerating here, I mean every room. So to be clear, I really do like secrets in games like this, but when you're required to rub your face against every wall, it becomes a lot less fun and a lot more tedious than it ought to be. With most games in the Souls series, it's very possible to beat them and have no idea what happened from a narrative perspective. Who did I just kill? Wait, what happened? Why am I doing this? The reason this can happen is because the story presents itself through little bits and pieces and item descriptions and dialogue from NPCs scattered around instead of something with more structure like cutscenes that lay it all out. That sort of story presentation may have taken inspiration from Kingsfield because it is very much the same with this game. Just like Dark Souls, you can beat the final boss and say to yourself, wait, what exactly just happened? As for how the story is presented, you can come across NPCs and they'll explain little things. They mostly make sense, but there are a few localization gems here and there that are pretty entertaining. The way the NPCs are spread out and the way in which they say cryptic things to you definitely gives the game a Soulsy feel. This plus the general atmosphere gives an almost ethereal mood to the game. Like yeah, just take this guy for example. He's wait a minute. Now I want to give a quick mention to the fact that Kingsfield will absolutely let you softlock yourself or just make the game way harder. The biggest example of this is how you can sell any item in the game, including important keys. If you really want to, the game will just let it happen. This reminded me of how the Souls games handle themselves. Like hey, if you want to kill Andre and permanently make the game more difficult in the process, you're allowed to. And with both Kingsfield and Dark Souls, I can't help but respect that Fromsoft has allowed for these scenarios. In my eyes, it shows a level of respect for the players by giving them this freedom to screw themselves over. You just very rarely see that these days. Also, I want to point out that if you do decide to do something, such as sell important keys, it's not like the game has tricked you into doing so. It simply gives you the choice and lets you suffer the consequences. And you know what? Maybe I'm crazy for liking something like that, but I do. Kingsfield is also pretty quirky. Not so much a Zoe Deschanel quirky, but more a, hey, the developers had some neat ideas quirky. So I want to highlight a couple. The first is this teleporting system. The way it works is you insert this key onto a pedestal found at save points, and then you can teleport back to this location using the corresponding gate in your inventory. Since you'll only have one key and one gate for most of your playthrough, this creates an interesting risk-reward dynamic whenever you want to move the key. Since you physically have to pick up the key and move it to a new location, you lose your warping ability as a safety net while shifting it somewhere else. To add to this dynamic, there are quite a few areas in the game where if you fall into them, you'll actually be stuck and soft-locked unless you have a warp point set up. So overall, this adds an extra layer of decision making when exploring that I haven't quite seen in other games. The second cool idea I want to talk about involves the rhombus keys. So there are quite a few doors that require these rhombus keys to get through. Think of them as like your generic dungeon key. Now what's interesting is that the doors you use them on are one-way doors both ways. What I mean by that is that they require a key for each direction you enter through. And what's also interesting is that you can pick up these keys and reuse them. This creates scenarios where if you're clever with how you use and reuse keys, you can gain access to more areas. So yeah, I just thought this was pretty neat, and I'm honestly surprised I haven't seen something similar in a Zelda game. Unless I'm just forgetting maybe? Alright, so there are a lot of gameplay mechanics central to the Souls series. Bonfires, an Estus flask, dodge rolls, making your character look like Shrek. But there's one that I feel gets overlooked sometimes. Backstabs. At their core, backstabs reward the player for getting behind an enemy by letting you do a lot of damage or even outright killing an enemy. Now, why am I talking about backstabs in a Kingsfield video? Because Kingsfield certainly doesn't have them. Or does it? With Kingsfield, if you can manage to maneuver yourself behind certain enemies, you can basically just win because the enemies handle like tanks and can't turn fast enough. As you can see here, I get behind this guy and I just go at it. This is backstabbing in 1995. Now, I'm not claiming that Kingsfield inspired backstabs in the Souls games, but I couldn't help but notice the parallels here and thought it'd be fun to point out. Now, fair warning, I'm going to talk about the final boss in this section, so feel free to skip ahead if you don't want to be spoiled. Alright, we good? Okay, so you go into this arena and it's Necron himself, the guy that all the NPCs have been mentioning constantly. Naturally, Necron starts doing some Street Fighter Shoryukens that launch magic missiles at you. At this point, I was sort of underleveled and undergeared, but I had fully accepted and embraced the jank of this game. So, I did the natural thing, and I ran into this little hole in the wall on the edge of the arena that protected me from the missiles while I shot 100 arrows into him for about 5 minutes. This actually worked, and naturally, I was pumped as hell. But this actually wasn't the end. Inexplicably, I wound up in the goddamn cyber zone for one more boss. And guess who it was? Calamite. Yes, Calamite from Dark Souls 1. Granted, he's not called that in this game, but just look at the model. It's nearly the same design. Not only that, but the famous Moonlight Greatsword from every Souls game is here too. As for the fight itself, it was 10 straight minutes of slapping him with my sword, spamming magic, and healing every 5 seconds because there were lasers and fire everywhere. Gameplay wise, this is pretty awful, but whatever. And eventually I got him, and he blasted off like Team Rocket. The world is now safe. You're welcome, everyone. So guess what I didn't find out until after I beat the game and looked up some things that I missed. This game has unique magic sword attacks for all the special swords in the game. Now, I'm not surprised I didn't stumble across this because it requires some precise button inputs with finicky timing. And as far as I can tell, the game never hints at this even existing. To do one of them, it's tap X, tap square, hold triangle, very quickly. So first off, this is really cool. But then it got me thinking about secrets in games that are easy to miss, specifically in Fromsoft's other games. In Demon Souls, an example of this would be World Tendency. If you're playing blind, it's extremely easy to miss everything connected to this. In Dark Souls, an example would be something like Ash Lake. It's a genuinely breathtaking secret area, but it's again incredibly easy to miss. If you're a game developer, one of the most terrifying things you can do is work on something for hours or days or weeks or months and then have it never be seen by someone who plays your game. So it takes a lot of courage to hide big things like this for the player. But the payoff is that the secrets they can uncover are really, really cool and actually worthwhile. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of this design sensibility when it comes to big secrets. It takes courage and shows respect for the players, and I'm happy that Fromsoft is still doing it with all their games to this day. So that's Kingsfield. It definitely shows its age in a lot of ways, and I'd honestly have a hard time recommending it to most people, but despite it all, there's some great nuggets of inspiration in terms of atmosphere and design that are worth looking at, especially within the context of Fromsoft's more recent games. And like I said before, there's a lot of jank, but there's an undeniable charm and uniqueness that shines through. Also, I still think it's really interesting as a piece of From Software's history, and it's fun to try and connect the dots between where they were in 1995 and where they are now in 2020. So yeah, that's it. I hope you found my thoughts interesting or entertaining. I feel like this game very rarely gets discussed, and I hope I did it justice. Oh hey, didn't see you there. I was just staring at the sponsored by Raycon text in the sky. It's me, Swolair. I used to be a chump, but then I got serious with my body. How's that? By using the everyday E25 earbuds while I worked out. My routine is pretty intense, and not for everyone, but it does work. These bad boys are half the price of other premium wireless earbuds, but they still sound great. Now if I'm getting earbuds, you already know what I need. I'm talking Bluetooth pairing, compact design, noise isolating fit, 6 hours of playtime because I don't have time to recharge. And most importantly, it needs to come in blue. Luckily, Raycon has me covered with all of these, so I'm set. If you want to get some for yourself so you can get guns like these, guns like these, click the link in the description. buyraycon.com/ironpineapple and get 15% off. Now if you'll excuse me, I have important things to do. Hold on. One last thing. Why is it called Kingsfield? There's not even a dang field in this game. 0 out of 10.